there comes a moment in every believer's life when fear stops looking like panic and starts looking like control. It hides beneath responsibility, behind sleepless nights, inside thoughts that whisper, "What if everything falls apart? What if I'm not enough? What if I fail?" Fear becomes subtle, familiar, a voice she learns to live with, even when it suffocates her peace. For years, she carried her life alone, trying to predict every outcome, protect every possibility, solve problems that hadn't even happened yet. She wasn't trying to take God's place. She was trying to survive. But survival has a way of making her forget who holds the world together. Her prayers became careful. Her heart became guarded. Her trust became conditional. Not because she didn't love God, but because she didn't know how to release the weight she carried. She whispered, "I trust you," but her hands never let go. And somewhere in the middle of her exhaustion, her fears grew louder than her faith. But one day, a simple, quiet day, something shifted. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a breakthrough that shook her world. It was a whisper in her spirit. Gentle and unmistakably not her own. "You don't have to live like this. Choose me instead of fear." She didn't fall to her knees. She didn't burst into tears. She simply paused. A pause deep enough for God to finally slip past the noise. In that pause, she realized the truth she had forgotten. Fear controls, God frees. Fear isolates, God restores. Fear drains, God strengthens. Fear blinds, God reveals. Fear demands certainty. God offers himself. And when her heart finally quieted enough to listen, she felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. Not a peace she created, but a peace given to her, the kind Scripture promises to those who surrender instead of strive. If you've ever lived in that tension, half faith, half fear, if you've ever trusted God, but still carried anxieties too heavy to name, if you've ever felt torn between control and surrender, then stay, because this video is for the woman who wants to stop bowing to fear and start walking with God again. And if these words already touched a place where worry once lived, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but for your journey, for the reminders your heart will need on the days fear speaks louder than faith. Now, let's talk about the moment she finally chose God instead of fear. Fear didn't enter her life suddenly. It grew quietly, almost gently, the way a shadow lengthens at the end of the day, without anyone noticing the light is fading. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to live afraid. Fear simply became the language her heart learned to speak after too many disappointments, too many losses, too many moments when life shifted beneath her feet. Without warning, she feared the unknown because the known had already hurt her. She feared change because stability had been rare. She feared trusting because trust had once left her broken. She feared surrendering to God because she secretly believed that if she didn't stay in control, everything might collapse again. And yet, every time she prayed, she felt the tension. The desire to trust God fully, and the instinct to protect herself. She didn't lack faith. She simply didn't know how to stop expecting life to fall apart. So fear settled into her routines. It shaped her decisions. It influenced her relationships. It drained her joy. It stole her peace long before she realized peace was missing at all. She overthought blessings because she feared losing them. She held her breath, waiting for something to go wrong. She planned for the worst, so she wouldn't be surprised by it. She analyzed every situation as if preparing for failure was safer than hoping for God's goodness. And the most painful part? Fear made her feel responsible for things that were never hers to carry. It convinced her that her effort was the only thing holding her world in place. It whispered that if she let go, if she rested, If she trusted too deeply, everything she loved would slip away. Fear turned her into the protector of her own life, when God had been offering protection all along. But God, in His tenderness, does not shame His children for their fear. He meets them in it. He steps into the trembling places of the heart and speaks a truth fear cannot imitate. You are safe with me. And even though she didn't yet understand it, even though she still held on to her anxieties, as if they were part of her identity, that whisper from God began to unravel the power fear had over her. Not all at once, but enough for hope to slip in again. There came a time when she realized that her life had become a quiet battlefield, not a war with people, not a war with circumstances, but a war inside her own heart. On one side was fear, familiar, persistent, convincing. Fear told her to prepare for disappointment. Fear told her not to expect too much. Fear told her that hope was dangerous, that vulnerability was risky, that trust was a doorway to pain. And on the other side was God, steady, patient, unwavering. He whispered promises that fear tried to drown out. He spoke peace that her mind struggled to accept. He called her to rest, while fear insisted she keep running. She felt torn between two voices, one loud, urgent, demanding, the other gentle, steady, eternal. Fear sounded more practical. Fear sounded more familiar. Fear sounded more like survival. But God did not compete for volume. He competed for her heart. Every time she prayed, she felt His presence settle into her spirit, like a soft light. Every time she opened Scripture, she found verses she didn't even realize were written for her. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Isaiah 41:10. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. But fear twisted those truths. It whispered, what if God doesn't show up this time? What if you're the exception? What if things don't get better? Fear made her believe that God's faithfulness had limits. And yet, God kept showing her reminders that He had been with her all along. The strength she found on days she thought she'd fall apart. The comfort that came from nowhere. The peace that settled on her spirit when she didn't have the words to pray. She began noticing that fear spoke of possibilities, but God spoke of promises. Fear showed her everything that could go wrong, but God reminded her of everything He had already made right. Fear told her she was alone, but God whispered, I will never leave you. The battle inside her wasn't about courage. It wasn't about personality. It wasn't about self-improvement. It was about faith. Faith that isn't loud. Faith that isn't perfect. Faith that sometimes trembles, but still reaches toward God anyway. She didn't win this battle in a single moment. She won it in small choices, tiny surrenders, day after day. And with every surrender, fear lost a little more ground. Her turning point didn't come in a moment of lightning or revelation. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't look like victory from the outside. It came in a whisper, a small, trembling prayer, spoken on a day when her strength had finally run out. A prayer without eloquence, without the right words, without confidence. Just honesty. God, I can't keep carrying this alone. It was the first time in a long time that she didn't try to sound strong in front of Him. She didn't try to impress Him with faith. She didn't try to pretend she had it all together. She let herself be the fragile, exhausted woman she had hidden from the world. And, instead of judgment, instead of disappointment, she felt something she had forgotten was even possible. God's nearness. Not the distant idea of God she held in her mind, but the God who draws close to the brokenhearted. The God who listens even to the trembling prayers we can barely speak. The God who doesn't wait for strength. He steps into weakness. In that quiet surrender, a shift happened inside her. She realized that surrendering to God was not losing control. It was placing her life into hands far more capable than hers. She realized she wasn't supposed to have everything figured out. She wasn't supposed to fight every battle alone. She wasn't supposed to carry fears that belonged at his feet. Fear had taught her that she needed to protect herself. God taught her that he had been protecting her all along. She began noticing a peace that didn't make sense logically, a softening in places that had been tight with anxiety for years, a lightness in her spirit that didn't match her circumstances, but came from somewhere deeper. She still didn't know the future. She still didn't have control, but she finally understood that God was not asking her to predict outcomes. He was asking her to trust him through them. Fear demands clarity before movement. God gives peace before answers, and that peace, that quiet, steady peace, became the foundation of her new life. Not a life without fear, but a life where fear no longer ruled her, a life where choosing God became more natural than choosing worry. That trembling surrender wasn't weakness, it was worship. There came a day when she realized that choosing God wasn't a moment, it was a daily decision. A quiet, persistent turning of her heart away from fear and toward the one who had never failed her. It didn't mean her circumstances changed overnight. It didn't mean her anxiety vanished instantly. It didn't mean she suddenly felt brave. But it did mean something deeper. She stopped bowing to fear. Every time worry rose up, she whispered scripture to herself. Every time doubt tried to steal her peace, she remembered the ways God had carried her before. Every time her mind spiraled into what if, she practiced saying, God is with me in this moment. She began to notice how fear lost power. Every time she invited God into the conversation, fear told her she was alone. God reminded her, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Fear told her she was unprepared. God whispered, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Fear told her she wasn't enough. God answered, I am your refuge and strength. She was no longer trying to defeat fear by becoming stronger or more disciplined or more confident. She was defeating fear by leaning into God more deeply. And the more she trusted him, the more she realized fear demands control. God invites surrender. Fear drains. God restores. Fear isolates. God draws near. Bit by bit, her faith grew louder than the anxious voice inside her. Not because she became fearless, but because she no longer believed that her fears had authority over her life. She didn't wake up fearless. She woke up surrendered. And in that surrender, she discovered a truth that reshaped her entire journey. Peace is not the absence of fear. Peace is the presence of God, despite fear. She didn't need to know the future, to trust the one who held it. She didn't need to feel strong, to rely on the one who was. She didn't need to erase fear, to choose God over it. She simply needed to take one step at a time, whispering, God, I choose you. Even when her knees trembled, that choice, made quietly, faithfully, repeatedly, became the turning point that fear could no longer undo. Because once she chose God instead of fear, her entire life began to breathe again. There comes a moment in a believer's life when the heart stops running, stops predicting, stops gripping the world with anxious hands, and finally rests in the presence of God. For her, that moment did not arrive through strength, but through surrender. Not through clarity, but through trust. Not through fear disappearing, but through realizing. She wasn't facing it alone. She had spent years fighting battles she was never meant to fight, trying to control outcomes that belong to the Lord, carrying burdens that were supposed to be laid at his feet. But when she finally chose God over fear, she discovered something she had been missing for far too long. A peace not tied to circumstances, a rest not dependent on understanding, a safety not built on self-protection, a hope not shaken by uncertainty. She realized that God had been waiting, not for her to be fearless, but for her to be honest. Honest enough to admit she was afraid, honest enough to say she was tired, honest enough to whisper, "Lord, I need you." And in that honesty, he met her, not with condemnation, but with compassion, not with pressure, but with presence, not with demands, but with the gentle assurance that she was held, guided, and loved. Her life didn't suddenly become simple. Her emotions didn't magically disappear, but her heart finally understood that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing God in the midst of it, and every time fear tried to rise, she could now answer it with a truth far stronger. My God goes before me. If these words reached you today, if your heart recognized itself in her hesitation, her exhaustion, her surrender, then let this be your reminder. You don't need to overcome fear on your own. You don't need to predict the future. You don't need to hold everything together. You need only to choose God, one moment at a time. And if this message spoke to your spirit, if it brought you comfort, clarity, or simply reminded you that you are not walking through life alone, consider subscribing, not for this channel's sake, but for your journey, so that whenever fear tries to return, you will always have a place to be reminded of the God who never left you. He is with you, He is for you, and you can choose Him over fear every single day.